Welcome to Bennett's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week I want to explore what brings people to the table, as it would be, and what keeps them coming back, like the hook. So Blues Traveler said the hook is what brings them back, right? And maybe that's the case. And what is the hook in D&D? What brings us back to the table each time? I think this may have changed, or at least the focus of the game has changed over time. Whether or not how people played changed, that's to be debated. But what brings us up, basically, is that I was watching a video. I was kind of binge watching a bunch of videos, so I don't remember exactly which one this was. And somebody was building an adventure, and they were giving advice on how to build kind of an adventure that could also be a campaign starter, typical stuff that we do here on YouTube. And I noticed that they were building factions and deep story with NPCs and a mission for the PCs to do to save this thing, for to be the heroes. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. And I've built adventures like that. And then I thought to myself, if you're building stuff for old school, right? So this particular channel talked a lot about old school essentials and Shadow Dark and stuff like that. And if you're doing that, wouldn't you want the hook, right, to just be get treasure? Because that's how you get experience points, right? And I wonder, was that the hook? Was that, you think, was that enough back in the early days? Was that the hook? Is that what we played for? And kind of, but I think there's something more to that. And that's what I'm going to kind of explore here. Like, what is the real hook to playing? Has that changed? And what can we do to really make it so the players want to keep coming back? To role play. I'm going to say that in the early days of the hobby, and I know that people were doing some role playing before D&D actually became a thing, and people will talk about that. And okay, fine. But I think in the early days of the hobby, like probably in the 70s and certainly in the early 80s when I started, it was kind of novel to play a game this way, to actually have a game where you were told to do this. Yes, as kids, we often got into playing, even my little dog or shoe in Monopoly, right? We would name them or do things, but that wasn't part of the game. This was something new. And I think the original hook of the game was not delve into dungeons and get treasure, which is what you get experience points for. It was to play the role of these heroes and delve into the dungeon and get treasure. That is to say, while people came back week after week to go deeper and deeper in the dungeon and to get more experience to become more powerful, that's because they wanted to play more powerful and more interesting and someone with more status in the world. They wanted to play different characters or take that one character through to another level. I'm sure from the beginning people were doing this, but I do think that maybe a lot of people, I know our group did that when we were younger. We didn't just go, let's make 10th level guys. We just never did that, right? We always started at low levels. And I've talked to people and they're like, oh, eventually we started. But those people played longer than I did probably, or maybe they were older. And so for me, that's how we played, right? Part of the hook was to see how far you could get your character. So you did the things that you needed to do to level them up. You got the gold and stuff. But that wasn't really what brought you there. So even though the game itself is stating, and we talk about this a lot when we talk about XP for gold versus killing monsters, right, in the OSR sphere or whatever, that opens up a lot of options because, that's the motivation. The players' characters will do this thing because they want experience points. But I think that a lot of people come to the table for the adventure, not just the leveling. I have made the statement many times that in a lot of the adventures written for old school, not necessarily old adventures, but adventures written for the old school, modern adventures, they don't give you enough gold. And there was kind of this idea, I was in a lot of Facebook groups and stuff, and people were talking about, leveling is not that important. Playing the first level character is the most challenge. So it's okay to have 4 gold pieces and keep your party poor. But that's not how we played back in the day. I mean, I'm sure some groups did. We played the way the book said to play, which is you got a lot of gold, right? And because you want to level up and you want to improve your character. So I wonder if people creating those adventures were looking at contemporary adventures or adventures that came after some of the original ones and were using those as baseline, more story-based adventures, and then they were shoehorning, right, an old school system into it, and that's why the leveling was, right? When we look at a mega dungeon, so for instance, I ran ASE, which is a kind of a cool mega dungeon. It was very popular at one point. It was one of the ones everybody was like, that's the one you got to run. And it's got maybe like 3 or 4 pages about the environment around it. And then a lot of it is just this huge dungeon with hundreds and hundreds of rooms. And I played it for about a year. I think we did every other week. Every once in a while, maybe like every 4th or 5th session, the players would be like, oh, we want to explore outside the dungeon. And we would go on side quests and do other things. At the end of the campaign, because I just ran it for 1 year, and I said, this is a campaign, 1-year campaign. I talked to the players, and the memories they had, the adventures they liked the most, weren't in the dungeon. They were the ones that I homebrewed, and I'm not saying that because I make better adventures. They were the ones that were in the world that the module presented. And when I look at the module itself, there was barely any gold in there. So what was the reason to go to this mega dungeon? There was no reason. If you're going to try to run a mega dungeon or a dungeon delving campaign, you can't be cheap with the gold, because why would the characters even want to do that? So this becomes a little bit tricky for some people. And what you end up getting is this idea that people, oh, I want to do this mega dungeon, but I can't have the characters have too much gold because they wouldn't go in there if they had too much gold. So I won't give them any gold. Then they'll have to go. But then after a while, they're like, why are we going into this dungeon and dying constantly when we're not getting any reward? So it creates this weird dynamic. I think you have to remove the realism or the economy of the gold and just go for, we're digging in the dungeon to get treasure to level, and that's our motivation. And you got to give it to them. You got to let them level. That, when you look at original Dungeons and Dragons, is pretty much what it tells you to do. You want to dig deep and dive down to the dungeon, be challenged, and then level up, get gold, get treasure, get magic items. This is what we want. We don't want to be stingy. If you're going to run that kind of campaign, that's something different. The hook can't be the mega dungeon, because the mega dungeon is, by its nature, probably not that interesting. Exploration. So let's say that your hook is exploration, and you're going to do a hex crawl type game. Cool. But again, if you're running an old school game, which is what I'm mostly talking about on this channel, and you're getting XP for gold, and you get that XP when you return the gold to effectively civilization, when you're hex crawling into wilderness, you're going to level really slow, and it's going to be very dangerous. And what's going to make the player characters keep coming back every week is hopefully the discovery around them. And if you run a very interesting world, then maybe that's enough. And maybe they don't care to level up too much. But if you're playing an old school game, it can often be pretty deadly at low levels, meaning that if you're out in the wilderness and you encounter a lair, that could be very bad. So low level characters are tough to run in that situation. So in order to make the hook exploration, we've got to also make the hook that there's things in the world they can gain beyond levels, because those levels are going to come slow. And when I say exploration here, I mean hex exploration. So again, rolling back, if you're going to make a mega dungeon, they've got to find lots of gold so they can go back and level up quickly. That's the hook. The hook is leveling, right? The hook for exploration is discovery of cool items and artifacts. That's going to make the player characters get stuff, and getting that stuff is going to make them want to keep going. They're delving into ruins. They're finding cool magic swords. They're finding treasure maps. This then pushes them forward. They may not get that gold right away, thus the level, but they will get the items. And again, maybe this is something for a little bit of a higher level, and I've talked about that before here as well. But what about the idea of just being heroes? Heroes of the realm. So going back to that video that I watched, and many videos that I make, where we're creating adventures where it's effectively you're saving somebody, you're doing a thing to be a hero. Where does this come from? How do we do this? How do we make this work? Well, I think for me, part of the reason why I've had success with these types of adventures is because I've run a lot of one-shots. And at one point I was running a one-shot a couple times a week with different people. And in a one-shot, nobody levels up, right? In a one-shot, you don't care about the gold. You're basically just trying to do it. So the theme of it can very easily be, we're escaping from this thing, we're trying to break into this thing, we're stealing this thing, and that's it, right? It's a thing that you're doing. And this can be a little bit linear, obviously there can be options, but basically what the hook there is it's just each time it's kind of completing a thing, winning that quest, if you will. But if it's a campaign, there's got to be something more. If we're sending them off to rescue somebody or to figure out why the well is tainted and there's no gold and there's no magic items, what are the players getting from this? Here is something a little bit different. This, I think, is what we what I would call like a more narrative situation. And I found, again, in later game, and I've talked about this before, like in my campaign currently where they're in 7th and 8th level, they're enjoying this kind of thing because they have already leveled up, got cool items, and they are in the position to change the world in not just I killed the Dragon King and now all of a sudden the land's free, but deeper political ways, more like kind of earth-changing ways that are more subtle. And I talked about this a little bit in the human scale video. They're at the point where the hook for them is the world. They are invested in this world. There's NPCs in this world that they have met and that they want to work with. They want to defeat. They want to save. They want to help thrive. The world is the hook. And that can be hard to establish and to create on a brand new adventure. So I think that what we often see a few things, when you're watching somebody build something. So kind of breaking down this kind of, I've done it, other people have done it. Basically in the beginning, and we're talking an old school game, you can create this idea that there's an evil lich and the lich is basically, polluting the land and ultimately they needs great heroes to destroy them. But at low levels, the players aren't going to really touch that. So that might be in the background. You might create a situation where the heroes might be sent off to places unknown to explore a mountain where there might have been a lost artifact. But again, at low levels, they're probably not going to be doing that unless they're part of a larger exposition. What they're going to be doing is delving into dungeons or the like to recover treasure. And this is how they level up. So unless you change that structure of the game, even if you're building out your campaign, there's a lich king that's destroying the lands. Ultimately, there's a magical weapon that has to be quested for. It's going to require, 500 leagues of travel through the wilderness. In the beginning, the player characters are just people in this world. And those people need a motivation to get them going. But also, in a meta sense, the players need a hook. And the hook for early level in this kind of game is the treasure. So you've got a few options here. Without changing rules, the basic way is to just have your first several adventures be based around that. There is a treasure map. There's a lost place that there should be treasure. There's these things. That should be enough motivation for you as a player and you as a GM to get going. You don't have to dig so deep into these other stories. They can literally just be a line in your campaign notes until you get to higher levels. And that's totally okay. Don't burn yourself out and get yourself all riled up about this lich when they're on first level because it's not going to matter. This whole idea of like, they should meet the lich in the first adventure. I don't agree with that. Let them go where they go. Let them be motivated by what they're motivated by, which at the beginning will be outside player motivation, wanting their characters to level up. Then little by little, character motivation that they've met people in the world. And at that point, if the lich is something they want to deal with, then yeah, that's the deal. If something else has happened and they're doing something else because that's what their characters want to do, then that's the campaign. And we've talked about this so many times before. So there you go. I feel like I might be treading on old ground here, but I kind of was putting it together in my head because I was thinking to myself, what is the hook? Why do we play every week? Why do I have a group that since 2016-ish, we've played almost every week? And I realize it's not always the same thing. On a meta level, these days, we're friends. We love to get together and play. But on a more practical level in the game and the various campaigns we've run, the actual hook changes and shifts as the player characters grow in the world, as the players learn the world. So know that the hook will bring them back at first. But just like any good pop song, you play it over and over and over again, that's a song you make fun of the next year as being terrible. So run your mega dungeon, but don't run it too long. Run your heroic quest, don't run it too long. Run your human level, but don't run it too long. Mix it all together, create a world that is moving and changing, and that will be the campaigns and group that will last. So I would love to hear your stories about this, what you guys do to kind of deal with that. Like if you don't love XP for gold and you have a different way that you motivate the levels in the beginning, how do you do it? Let me know what you do. I always love to hear that. Also, if something, maybe this will be a deeper conversation if we get some ideas in the comments, and we'll kind of go from there. Keep in mind that I always kind of do that. If people are commenting and something sparks my imagination, I will make a video about it. So go ahead and comment if you have an idea. Also, check the description. Down there, you're going to find a link to my podcast that I do with KR King, Monsters and Treasure. Really fun. KR has D&D Homebrew. Check them out as well. Also down there, you're going to find links to my Patreon and my Discord, where there's lots of great conversations going on about running games, playing games, designing games, and just games in general. I'll talk to you soon.